Let's go over the yellow sheet, which I copied in white to make it a little bit easier on the eyes. What you need to understand about this sheet is that the objective is to convert all of the different units, ounces, cups, teaspoons, and tablespoons, into milliliters, because milliliters are the standard unit of measurement for volume for healthcare. So you have to make sure that you look at the keys on these worksheets. So this side of the key just tells you the different abbreviations that you might see for ounces, cups, teaspoons, and tablespoons, and it also tells you that 1 milliliter is the same thing as 1 cc. cc stands for cubic centimeter, but we usually don't measure our liquids in centimeters, so we're going to put everything into mLs, milliliters. Some of you have this box on your worksheet and others don't, because maybe you have an older version. If you don't, that's okay. Just go ahead and pause your video and write down everything that you see here. What this says is that whenever you're converting ounces to milliliters, you're going to take the number of ounces and multiply it by 30. If you're converting cups to milliliters, you're going to take the number of cups and multiply by 240. If you're converting teaspoons to milliliters, you're going to take the number of teaspoons and multiply by 5, or the number of tablespoons and multiply by 15, and that's how you get to milliliters. The next thing to note down here is that we're only calculating the milliliters of liquids. So if something does not melt into a liquid, if it was set out like at room temperature, then it's not a liquid. So you can see that popsicles, ice cream, and jellos do melt into a liquid, and therefore they are considered liquids. But other things that are soft, such as mashed potatoes or pudding, would not melt into a liquid, and so therefore they're considered solids, and we're not going to calculate those. We're only calculating liquids into milliliters whenever we do intake and output. So we call that I and O. So let's move on to this part of the page. You can see that here we are taking 4 ounces and we're converting it into milliliters, and we're writing that down here. So if that's the case, we would take 4, multiply it by 30, so 4 times 30, and we're putting it into this box right here. And next we have 8 ounces of milk. We're going to multiply it by 30 and put that there. So how do we do this? We could use a calculator and multiply those ounces times 30, or we could write it out with a pen and paper. And this is what it would look like if we did something like this. Maybe we wanted to take 5 ounces and convert that into milliliters. So we would put the milliliters, the conversion unit on top, that's 30. We put the bigger number on top, so we do 30 times 5. So the first thing we have to do is 5 times 0, that's 0. The next thing that we have to do is 5 times 3, and that is 15, and we write 1, 5. So when we're converting 5 ounces into milliliters, we do 30 times 5 is 150, and then we would write that off to the side. So let's continue on. Down here we would multiply, we would do the urine cups, the cups of urine. 2 cups of urine, we would do 2 times 240, write that over here. Where things get a little bit more complex, and I get a lot of questions, are when we have all of these halves. So questions number 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9 are all halves. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to convert, we have to figure out what half of all of these things are. So for number 4, we'd have to figure out what is half of 12. For number 5, what is half of 10? For number 6, what is half of 1? Because this is 1/2 of 1 cup of liquid stool, so it's half of 1. Number 7, what is 1/2 of 16? And number 9 is what is 1/2 of 4. So we'd have to figure out that first and then multiply by the units in this box. Okay, so what would that look like? Let's just say that we wanted to figure out what is half of 14 ounces. How do we figure out what is half of 14 ounces? Well, first of all, the first thing we would do is half of 14 ounces is 7, and because we're dealing with ounces, we'd be multiplying by 30. So we would do 30 times 7. So the first thing we do here is 7 times 0 is 0, and then the next thing we would do is 7 times 3 is 21. We'd write 210. So we know that half of 14 ounces is 210 milliliters. But what if we didn't know what half of 14 is? And I do get these kinds of questions. So let's talk about how do we figure out what half of something is. So in this case, we would be wanting to know what is half of 14. So a couple of easy ways that you can do that. The first thing is you could just do it on the calculator. What is half of 14? It's going to be 7. Another way, if you didn't have a calculator on you, is you could ask what number, when added to itself, equals 14. So we would be asking what number, adding it to itself, it has to be two of the same number. 7 plus 7 equals 14. If that didn't work either, you could draw dots in a box, and that's what I would recommend. Is probably the easiest if you don't mind drawing boxes. And so it would look something like this. We would make two equal groups, and we would put in, so we have two equal columns, these rectangles, and we would put in 14 dots. So if you count all of these green dots, we've got 14. So now that all of our 14 dots are in equal groups, now we just count up how many dots are like in the right-hand column. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we know that half of 14 equals 7. So once we know what half of 14 is, we can go back and do this problem. Half of 14 ounces is 7 ounces. 7 times 30 is 210. So then I've had people ask, well, this final answer, do I have to do half of this? No, you don't. You already figured out what half of 14 was, so then you don't have to do anything else with this answer. You can just consider that done. So that's how we convert that into milliliters. Let's go down to the bottom of this page, and we're going to be calculating from tablespoons and teaspoons into milliliters. So tablespoons, whenever we're dealing with tablespoons, we need to multiply by 15. And so you can see number 8, we're dealing 4 tablespoons. And so I'm just going to do that with you. 4 tablespoons, we have to multiply it by 4. So we put the big number on top, 15 on top, and on the bottom is 4 tablespoons. So the first thing we're going to do is, what is 4 times 5? That's going to be 20. We put the 2 up there. We put the 0 down here. The next thing we do is 4 times 1. 4 times 1 is 4, and then we add 2 more. So 4 plus 2 is 6. So we can see that 4 tablespoons is 60 milliliters. So once we're done with that sheet, we can go on to the back side where we're dealing with Katie and we're dealing with Christopher. And there's some tips up here at the top. And the one tip is to cross out all of the solids. And one really important thing to know about this is that we have 2 different columns here. We've got an intake column, that's any liquids that enter the body are going to be put into this column. And then here's the output column, and output is any liquids that are expelled from the body. And again, we're dealing only with liquids. So remember that we're going to cross out anything that's a solid. So let's actually do the 815 first. Okay, so 815, she had 2 eggs, she had some juice, bacon, milk, and toast. I crossed out all the eggs, the bacon, and the toast because those are solids, and we need to calculate just the liquids. So here we have half of 4 ounces of juice. The first thing we have to do is figure out what is half of 4. That is 2. And then 2 ounces. So 2 times 30 is going to be 60 of juice. And so I'm writing down 60 of juice. Next we have milk. We have half of 4 ounces of milk. That's 2 ounces of milk. 2 times 30 is 60. And notice that I itemized these over here. I did 60 in juice and 60 of milk. I didn't add it all together into 120 because later on if I make an error down here, it's easier to see where I went wrong if I itemized these out individually. Let's go back up here to 745. Here this says that she voided, that means she went to the bathroom. She voided 425 milliliters of urine. Well, thank goodness it's already converted into milliliters, so we just write it straight across here. Now we're going to go to, she drank half of 12 ounces of soda, so you figure out what half of 12 is, multiply it by 30, put it here. At 11:45, she voided again. She went to the bathroom. 16 ounces, so you do 16 times 30, put it over here for the output. Next we have she ate a sandwich, Jell-O, chips, tea, and ice cream. We're going to cross out all the solids, and then we're going to convert the 8 tablespoons of Jell-O, the 8 ounces of tea, and the 12 teaspoons of ice cream into liquids, and we're going to write them really small in this box. We're going to itemize them just like we did up here so that if we make a mistake, then we can figure out where we went wrong. Here at 1:50 in the afternoon, she vomited. That's output, and that's in cc's. Remember, 1 cc equals 1 milliliter, so it's already converted. So we're going to have 100 milliliters right here. Then we have 1 formed stool. Well, with stool, that's formed, and so that's not going to be considered anything that we need to calculate on here because we're only putting our liquids on here. So we crossed that out, and we're only going to pay attention to the 1 cup of urine, which we're going to convert into milliliters and put it here. When we're done with all of that, then we're going to take all of our input numbers or our intake numbers, add them all up, put the total right here. Then we're going to add up all of our total output numbers here. How do we do that? Well, we could certainly use a calculator if we wanted to, but if we didn't have a calculator, we would have to do some kind of old school long addition, kind of like this. These are not the numbers on the worksheet. This is just what we would could potentially end up adding up at work. And so we remember that sometimes we have to carry a 1 to the next column, so don't let that mess you up. But sometimes we do have long strings of numbers that we have to add up. Next we go down and work on Christopher's numbers. Again, it's intake and it's output, and then there's our trick down at the bottom with the potatoes and the pudding. Those are not liquids. And everything's pretty much the same here. Remember though, everything has to be converted into milliliters, and then we're totaling the boxes at the end. If you have any additional questions, I know we went through this really fast. If you have any additional questions, please ask an instructor.